If you look on the back of most video game accessories, there's a model number because you really want to know exactly what accessory you have. This is the MK1470 controller for the Sega Genesis, which is slightly different than this one, which happens to be the MK1470X. Okay, well now I know that there's a slight difference between these two controllers. And here's another one. This one's the wireless controller, which has a different number. The MK1629. Even Sega AC adapters have their own model number. This happens to be the MK1479, which powers the Model 3 and the Sega Nomad, but does not power the Model 1 or Model 2. It's kind of important to know what the model number is. That's the reason the model number exists. But somebody at Sega didn't really see it that way. Because even though this is the MK1470, we can see that right there, MK1470, and it looks like this, then why is there another controller also branded the MK1470 that looks and feels completely different? This, my friends, is the Sega model MK1470. But this is the MK1470. Who the hell did this? For most people, this probably isn't a big deal, and I'll be honest, in the grand scheme of things, it really isn't a big deal. If the model number of a Sega Genesis controller upsets you, you may need to get out more. It kind of upsets me. In any event, let me explain why. It's the cheapest, most poorly made Sega Genesis controller that I own. And if you watch this show, you know I have about 30 different Sega Genesis controllers. But the MK1470, this one, is the worst. Why is it the worst? Because it's kind of awkward. And it's ugly. I don't like the red thing in the middle where you can pick turbo speed or slow motion. It feels like it's not put together very well. The buttons are kind of awkward compared to most of the Sega Genesis controller, and the D-pad feels cheap. It's just not the best Sega Genesis controller. However, it is completely functional and works fine. You see, the actual MK1470, the one that I'm just going to assume is the real MK1470, is a bit smaller than most of the Sega Genesis controllers, but it's put together fairly well, although it does feel cheaper than the original old school Sega Genesis controllers. Has your normal turbo and slow buttons. Just has a nice feel to it. It's great for fighting games like Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat, and games that require 6 buttons like many of the 32X games. The MK1470 oddball number 1 is just a bit larger. It looks like it's got the same style that the actual old school 3-button Genesis controller has, but it doesn't. It's not that big and it feels off. Something about these cheap plastic molded parts just ruin the whole design, and it looks like crap, and I don't like it. But when you're dealing with something as important as Sega Genesis controllers and a model number, hairs need to be split, and skulls need to be cracked. Who named these things? I'm gonna give it a different model number. Let's see. This shall now be known as the MK1470X. That X didn't really go on there very clearly, did it? Let's make it bigger. There we go. The X is for xylophone. After all, the xylophone is the weakest of all instruments, as this is the weakest of all Sega Genesis controllers with the MK1470 model number. And when you shake it and strangle it, it makes a little rattling sound. Oh, and I'd like to thank Frank in California for donating this to Classic Game Room. Thanks, Frank. I really appreciate it, even if I'm trying to strangle it on camera.